Hello and welcome to Reverie True Crime. I'm your host, Paige. If you missed out on the virtual live show on February 12th, you can still grab a ticket and go to moment.co/Reverie True Crime because they will have the replay up for a week. From August 25th through the 27th, the True Crime and Paranormal Podcast Festival will be in Austin, Texas. You can grab your early bird tickets now to see some of your favorite podcasters, family advocates, and survivors at truecrimepodcastfestival.com. With all of that being said, let's jump right into this episode. Judith Ann Adams was born in Murfreesboro, Tennessee on June 7, 1964. Judith was a cheerleader who moved to Alabama. She had two older sisters, two younger brothers, and her parents were married. Judith had a decent childhood for almost the first decade of her young life. Her family was deemed middle class, and they were your average ordinary family residing in a rural area trying to get by. Life was going well for Judith up until she was 9 years old. A tragedy transformed their lives for the worst. Her father was unfortunately an alcoholic, and one day in March of 1974, he was wasted. He made a terrible decision to hop on his motorcycle and fatally crashed. The motorcycle hit an embankment so forcefully, the impact propelled him into the air and he landed about 100 feet away from his bike. After Judith's father died, the sparkle in her eyes faded away. The family was shattered, bereaved, confused, and heartbroken. Their father was the glue that bonded the family together. He was the breadwinner of the household, and the love he had for his family knew no limits. The reality of someone they love not being there anymore, that empty atmosphere, became a lot for Judith's mother to bear. Aimless, with no plan, Judith's mother eventually started inviting different men over who would traipse in and out of the house frequently. All while Judith's bed was in the same room as her mother's, only a sheet suspended between their beds to separate them. Their mother also ran through her late husband's life insurance rapidly. Living in a small town where everyone knows each other, nobody in the community was safe from being gossiped about. Even when some people who were the topic of discussion were minding their own business. With Judith's mother being promiscuous, people were noticing different men coming and going from their house all the time. The townspeople's whispers were deafening. The kids would be bullied by others who would say their mother was a whore, among other derogatory words. Judith did not appreciate that her mother was not very present, leaving her and her siblings to raise each other. Judith wanted to be a typical adolescent, not take on the role of an adult. Her eldest siblings lived there until they were in their early 20s, but Judith left her home behind much earlier, at only 15 years old. Alvin Howard Neelley Jr. was born on July 15, 1953, in Tryon, Georgia. He was the baby of the family, the youngest of 3 children. As a child, he had it made with a terrific life, loving parents, and he usually got anything he wanted handed to him on a silver platter. He was described as an adorable, charismatic, bubbly kid, the class clown, a Cub Scout, popular, always trying to make others laugh, and everyone wanted to be around his positive energy. When Alvin was old enough to get a job, he had been so privileged that he simply did not want to work. He was so acclimated to being spoiled, he would do anything other than apply for a job. Alvin started committing petty crimes to get whatever he wanted. He would flake out on paying his rent, he would rob little stores and steal cars. Alvin did all he could to avoid taking on any responsibilities. By 1979, Alvin was married to his first wife, Joanne Browning, and they had 3 children. He was extremely abusive towards her, bossed her around, and beat her terribly, according to Joanne. In 1980, Alvin's brother had been communicating with a lady over his CB radio, and he was entranced by her. He was enthusiastically gushing to Alvin all about her. The woman's CB name was Indian Princess, and she had given Alvin's brother her address to come over for a good time. When the brothers arrived, Indian Princess, who turned out to be Judith's mother, was outside waiting. 26-year-old Alvin and 15-year-old Judith had locked eyes. They became inseparable, and Judith believed she was wildly in love. She was only a teenager who didn't know any better. A male was giving her attention and made her feel loved. Her mother seemed so far removed that she didn't care if her teenage child was dating an adult. Alvin had a vile interest in young teenage girls. The moment they saw each other lit the spark that unfortunately ignited feelings of love, envy, a life of petty crimes, and eventual murderous deeds. Not long after meeting, Alvin left his wife and kids for a Bonnie and Clyde lifestyle with Judith. They even called themselves Boney and Claude. The two spontaneously eloped that same year. They would go on to commit crimes throughout Georgia, Alabama, and Tennessee. Halloween, 1980. Judith Neelley was 9 months pregnant when she held up a lady at gunpoint at a mall in Georgia. She stole the woman's checkbook and fled the scene. 2 weeks later, Judith was attempting to use the stolen checks at a store and was caught. After the cashier gave details to the police about their car, Judith and Alvin were promptly tracked down and hauled off to jail. They were both charged with 15 counts of forgery. While in jail 2 days after their arrest, Judith gave birth in her cell to twins. The next year, on November 17, 1981, Judith was transferred from the jail to Rome Youth Detention or Development Center, also known as the YDC. That stay is when things took a drastic, hard turn. According to Judith, at the YDC, she was raped, and they were operating a secret prostitution ring. True or not, she built up a lot of anger during her time there. She and Alvin wrote letters back and forth while they were incarcerated. For the most part, the letters were extremely sexual in nature. She did mention to Alvin that she was being sexually abused in the YDC, which led the couple to put in writing their plans of revenge, but the letters would not be discovered until later. When Judith and Alvin were released and reunited, they began to put their plans in motion. Ken Dooley was a security guard and the only male at the YDC. Allegedly, he never did attempt to stop all of the abuse he witnessed while working there. This really upset Judith that a man wouldn't do something to protect all of the women. Ken was their first target. Judith was driving a brown Dodge with her newborn twins. Also, as a sidebar, throughout their crime sprees, keep in mind these babies were present even though they're not specifically talked about very much in court documents. They were there during everything. Alvin was driving a red Ford Granada. The two would use the CB radio to communicate. She went by the name Lady Sundown, and he went by Night Rider. The two were very different in the way they took care of themselves and their cars. Judith was known to not have good hygiene. She was sloppy, dirty, and the inside of her car reflected that too. Alvin was the complete opposite. He had great hygiene, took care of his appearance, made sure his hair looked neat, and he took good care of his car. That is one of the main reasons they decided to have two different vehicles. Another reason was because Judith's mood changes infuriated Alvin. Sometimes Judith was in a decent mood, acted kind towards him, but in the blink of an eye, she would turn ice cold and callous. At some point, Judith called Ken Dooley's home. The first time, Ken answered. She pretended to be a friend of his wife, wanting their address so she could come see her sometime. It worked. Another call came in a few days later. When Ken's wife answered, Judith left a message for Ken. When he arrived home, his wife told him she thought someone from the YDC was trying to reach him, but that they had said they would call back later. The call came, but this time it wasn't a woman. Ken answered, and on the other line, a man said something along the lines of, "That will be the last woman you ever fuck." On the night of September 11th, 1982, shots rang out at Ken Dooley's home. 4 bullets were shot into his home while the family slept. Ken hurried outside to see who the culprit was, but it was too dark, and he couldn't really make out the cars as they raced away. Linda Adair was another employee at the YDC whose home Judith and Alvin firebombed with a Molotov cocktail the next day. Phone calls were also made to Linda from a female who said she was sexually abused at the YDC, but Linda, along with Ken, did not recognize Judith's voice. Luckily, nobody was harmed during those attacks. Judith made phone calls to the police anonymously to say she committed the crimes against Ken and Linda, explaining that she had been sexually assaulted during her time at the YDC. Judith also said Ken and Linda would be dead before the night was over. The police began recording the phone calls as Judith would anonymously start calling them on a regular basis. Law enforcement took note of her words, pronunciations she used, how she spoke in a unique way, starting every call with yes, and pronouncing Alabama as Abama. Investigations launched into the YDC and the alleged sexual abuse taking place there. Linda and Ken were constantly being questioned. The ongoing questioning and claims were highly upsetting to them both. They were infuriated. Everyone they spoke to at the YDC denied the accusations. Judith also called Miss Allen, who worked at the YDC, asking her to come to the hotel she was staying at, begging this Miss Allen to help her out because her husband was beating her. Miss Allen agreed that she would go to the motel, though there's a likelihood she began to think about all the attacks on the employees of the YDC and thought better of it, because she did not show up. Judith called the YDC looking for Miss Allen, but they told Judith that Miss Allen had left on vacation. Not believing she was on vacation, Alvin and Judith went to the YDC and saw her car was in fact at work. More harassment and failed entrapment attempts of YDC employees kept on until Alvin and Judith felt the police were connecting the dots and were getting a bit too close. The two backed away from the YDC and began trolling in their separate cars around Rome, Georgia. Lisa Milliken was a 13-year-old little girl living at a Methodist home for neglected children in Cedartown, Georgia, called the Ethel Harpst Home. Lisa had been taken out of her home multiple times, and her father had sexually abused her since she was 11 years old. Needless to say, at only 13, she had experienced trauma and a difficult beginning to her life. Before she was removed from her home, Lisa had been living in a car with her mother and other siblings. The other girls at the Ethel Harpst home didn't seem to like Lisa very much. She was a beautiful girl who caught the eyes of all the young boys. The other girls were said to be simply envious of her and pushed her away for that reason. Lisa was a tough girl, though, and a little rough around the edges. She wasn't a delinquent. At the same time, she didn't mind being the black sheep of the crowd who was her own person, not fitting in with any certain clique. Lisa was a smaller girl with shaggy brown hair. She was often compared to the actress from Happy Days who played Joni Cunningham. On September 25, 1982, all the girls at the home were taken by a house parent on an outing to Riverbend Mall in Rome, Georgia. Lisa got separated from the group as they were window shopping. All the while, Judith was there by herself, looking for little girls or very young women to lure to her car. A woman, especially with babies tagging along with her, doesn't seem as threatening as a man. She would tell the young girls that she met that she was new in town, lonely, and wanted to ride around, check out the sights. This was all a part of their strategy for Judith to bring girls to Alvin so he could rape them. Driving in separate cars, they had been riding the streets for a few days, contacting each other by the CB radio, but were allegedly unsuccessful in their efforts to find a victim. That is, until Judith spotted Lisa Milliken at the mall. Lisa was wandering around when Judith talked her into leaving with her. She drove to a motel in Franklin, Georgia. Judith kept trying to convince the 13-year-old to engage in sexual activities with Alvin, but Lisa kept saying no time and time again. Alvin was furious. He told Lisa he would kill her if she didn't submit herself to him. Alvin proceeded to viciously rape the helpless child. Later that evening, Lisa got handcuffed to the bed. She was trapped. During this time, Alvin's mother was taking care of his and Judith's twins in Cleveland, Tennessee. Judith, Alvin, and Lisa went to get the babies the next day. Afterwards, they went to Scottsboro, Alabama, to rent a motel room. When they got inside with the babies, Judith struck Lisa's head with a slapjack over and over again. A slapjack is a slab of leather, usually containing heavy lead inside of it. Judith kept hitting her on the head with it, trying to make Lisa go unconscious. It didn't work. Alvin sexually assaulted Lisa once more. The teenager was again handcuffed to the bed, nude, and slept on the floor. Day 3, Alvin raped Lisa at least 2 more times while she cried. She begged for him to stop and shouted out for help, but unfortunately, her screams fell on deaf ears. Judith stood by, watching it all happen with her babies right there. Afterwards, Judith took Lisa to the bathroom, handcuffed her to the plumbing, and interrogated her about some man Lisa supposedly knew at a dairy bar by the motel. On day 4, they threw Lisa in one of their cars and took her to Little River Canyon. Judith demanded her to get out of the vehicle, lie face down, and ordered Lisa to put her arms around a little tree in front of her so she could handcuff her to it. Judith began to tell Lisa what she was going to do to her. She said she was going to give her a shot that would make her fall asleep, explaining to the child that when she woke up, they would be gone and she would be able to take off. Filling a syringe with Drano and liquid plumber, Judith injected Lisa in the neck. While they were previously in jail, the couple learned that if you injected someone with drain cleaner, it would make it impossible for police to tell they were murdered. They went with it. However, time went by, and Lisa was still very much alive, but in terrible pain. Judith injected her twice more in the arms and twice in the butt, waiting after each injection for her to die, but it wasn't working. Lisa asked twice during the injections if she could use the bathroom while they were in the woods, and Judith allowed it. Each time, Lisa would go back to Judith and lie down on her stomach, putting her arms back around the tree to be handcuffed again. When the final injection failed to kill her, Judith told Lisa to get up and walk around. She hoped it would somehow speed up the process of the drain cleaner, but Lisa was just suffering. Judith realized she likely wasn't going to die. She marched Lisa to the edge of a cliff on the canyon. The plan being to shoot Lisa in the back so she would fall forward off of the cliff and into the canyon. Lisa broke down, begging Judith to take her back to the Harp's home and that she would never tell anybody what happened. Judith ordered Lisa to quit talking, then fatally shot her in the back. Instead of falling forward as Judith thought she would, Lisa fell backwards. Judith sprinted over to the child's body, lifted her up, and used her knee to push her off the cliff. Afterwards, Judith's clothes were bloody. She stripped off her pants and threw those over the cliff as well. On October 9, 1982, the outlaws Boney and Claude, or Knight Rider and Lady Sundown, were in Nashville, Tennessee, searching for young women in their separate vehicles. Judith came across a very nice couple, Janice Chapman and John Hancock. They were engaged, and Janice was pregnant. Judith, with her children in the back seat, pretended she was looking for directions to a certain road. She acted like she couldn't understand the directions, so John and Janice jumped in the car, and after a short time they met up with Alvin. Alvin told John to ride with him, and Janice to ride along with Judith and the kids. After driving for a while, John needed to relieve himself, so Alvin pulled over on the side of a dirt road with Judith behind them. John got out of the car, and Judith was following him with a gun. As she stood behind him, she told him coldly and rigidly that she was going to take care of Janice too. Then she shot him in the back. However, right before the blast, John had taken a little half step to the left, which is a move he learned in the military that may have saved his life. Judith and Alvin left John for dead. John lay there for a while until a trucker showed up and kindly gave him a lift to the hospital where they extracted the bullets. The following day, John was at the Rome police station when he happened to hear police playing a recording of Judith Neelley's voice. Officers were in a room where they were investigating Lisa Milliken's murder. John went into the room, but before he could speak, an investigator told him to leave because he had an interview shortly. John explained to him that he would leave, but he needed him to know the woman he was listening to on that tape was the same woman who abducted him and his fiancée Janice. From there, John told the police what Alvin and Judith's vehicles looked like, which would help officers get to them much faster. Meanwhile, after Judith and Alvin had shot John in the woods, they took Janice back to their seedy motel room in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. They kept her there, tortured her, raped her, and injected her with Drano and other cleaning solution products. Alvin and Judith drove Janice to a wooded location after they were finished tormenting and abusing her. Judith shot Janice in the back, but it was not fatal. This made Alvin furious. So Judith walked up to her and allegedly shot her at point-blank range in the chest. It's reported that Janice made it to a hospital where she was on life support, but she didn't make it. Judith happened to get busted and arrested October 9th, 1982 on a bad check charge, and on October 13th, 1982, Alvin was arrested on the exact same charge. They had been suspected of the murders for a while, and this moment was law enforcement's chance to see what they could get out of them. After a lot of questioning of the couple, Judith told the police that she was the person calling the police station, as well as attacking and harassing YDC employees. During the investigation, police obtained a search warrant for Judith's mother's home. She and Alvin had been staying with her mother before they were arrested, and there was a lot of evidence in that house, including 2 CB radios, handcuffs, several guns, and knives, to name a few. To avoid the death penalty, Alvin pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and murder for the slaying and abduction of Janice Chapman in Georgia. When the duo was charged, they began to blame each other. Alvin said Judith was in charge, and Judith said she did everything Alvin told her to do, that he had put a gun to their babies' heads and said if she didn't do what he said, he would kill them all. Therefore, she didn't test him. Judith claimed in the beginning that Alvin was not accompanying her during the time by the canyon. She changed her tune later, saying Alvin was telling her what to do and watching her every move. She claimed she was conditioned by Alvin and descended into a vegetable-like state. Judith claimed that he called the shots and she obeyed. In some of Judith's accounts, Alvin was with her during the shootings, but in some out-of-court statements she made, he wasn't there for Janice Chapman's murder, but he was there when she shot John Hancock. A clinical psychologist examined Judy and testified that she, quote, probably fits the battered women syndrome to the most severe extent that I have ever seen. The psychologist also made note that Alvin's mental state was replaced by Judith's, so she had no plans of her own. Judith was pregnant at the time of her arrest, and she gave birth to her third child while she was locked up, awaiting her trial. On March 7, 1983, Judith's trial began in Fort Payne, Alabama, and it lasted for 6 weeks. During that time, the coroner testified that Lisa Milliken's skin was the same consistency of anchovy paste when her body was found. It was a descriptive, disturbing trial to say the least. Judith being 18 years old now, her attorney attempted to seek the youthful offender status, but the judge denied it. Either it was Judith's truth or to appear as a victim, but she blamed Alvin for everything and said she was scared of him, that he abused her, controlled her, and that she went by his rules. Her children and relatives believed this to be true. As Judith testified, she lowered her head, her hair covering up her face as if she was sobbing. The prosecutor took a risk as she talked about the abuse she allegedly suffered at the hands of Alvin. She dropped her head again, sniffling. The prosecutor went for it. He instructed her to lift her head up. He was mostly confident about what the outcome would be when she raised her head up, but there was still a small chance it wouldn't have worked in his favor. However, when she raised her head, her eyes were completely dry, not a tear in sight. She looked cold as ice. In the prosecutor's closing arguments, he told the jury Judith was evil, evil. He said he had tried murders, rapes, sodomies, but how Judith acted was unlike any other. He told the jury, "You have felt it. It has hung in this courtroom, and you have felt it. It's been more than an atmosphere. It's been a reality." The prosecutor had never used the word evil before or since when describing a killer or even a petty criminal. Judith was convicted of the torture and murder of Lisa Ann Milliken, and the jury recommended a life sentence. Though the judge overruled the jury's recommendation and sentenced the mother of 3 to die in the Alabama electric chair. Following her sentence, she did admit that she kidnapped and shot Janice Chapman to avoid another death sentence. Judith was the youngest female sentenced to death in the U.S. She was locked away on death row at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women. Alvin was not sure what Judy might say. He was nervous, so he pleaded guilty to kidnapping with bodily harm and intent to murder Janice Chapman. Initially, Alvin said he did not rape Lisa Milliken, but he eventually gave in, claiming the crimes were all Judy's ideas. Alvin said Judith was infatuated with having rough sex with women, but her real turn-on was power. The power to control whether someone lived or died. Having their life in her hands was the ultimate rush for her. Alvin stated his wife took the lives of 8 people, maybe even upwards of 15. Her role, according to him, was the, quote, enforcer for a white slave ring. During Alvin's trial, his ex-wife, Joanne Browning, was there to testify. She recounted all of the abuse she suffered. Even when she was pregnant, it didn't stop him. Joanne said that Alvin had drugged and attempted to rape her teenage sister. She said she tried to leave the marriage many times, but Alvin kept threatening their children. The only way she escaped the marriage was by Alvin falling head over heels for Judith. Judith testified during Alvin's trial as a way to avoid another death sentence. She claimed the attacks on the YDC and even the accusations that she had been sexually assaulted at the facility had all been fabricated by Alvin. She went on to explain how she was only Alvin's servant, and he was consistently vile, selfish, and would get more violent by the day. Judith said she would give him baths, dry him off, comb his hair, cooked his meals, tied his shoes, and if she did any of the tasks in a way that Alvin did not approve of, he would assault her. She alleged that Alvin was the one who taught her how to steal and forge checks. Alvin was also a very jealous man and did not believe Judith was being faithful. She went on to talk about all of the beatings and the rapes he imposed on her. She was pretty convincing at portraying herself as a victim, whether she actually was or not. Alvin Neelley was sentenced to 2 life sentences. He also drew a map for police that would lead them to Janice Chapman's body. She was found face down in a creek, awfully decomposed. There are speculations that Alvin and Judith may have murdered more people. In August of 1984, a woman came forward by the name of Casey. She had been abducted a few years back and saw the person that did that to her in the newspaper. It was Judith Neelley. Casey went to the police to tell them what happened to her right before Judith was arrested. When Judith picked up Casey, she boasted about the crimes she had committed. She told Casey she had murdered a girl in Chattanooga, spoke about how she had killed many others, and said she kept all the newspapers where the victims had gone missing. Judith rambled on all night long to Casey and had no remorse or fear. Judith told Casey that she took pleasure in the looks on victims' faces when she would pull a gun on them. The next morning was when Judith was arrested for bad checks. During that time, Alvin had Casey in the motel bathroom at gunpoint until the police were gone. Then, he actually told her to get out. She was free. In 1989, the U.S. Supreme Court approved Judith's death sentence. On May 18, 1994, Judith had harmed herself by slitting her wrist with razor blades from a disposable razor, but it wasn't severe enough to be fatal. A few days before this, 26-year-old Elisa Wall was discovered deceased. She had sadly shot herself in the throat. During the investigation, an eerie cassette tape was found. On that tape was a discussion between Elisa and Judith. The two women had been preparing a suicide pact that they would carry out at the same time. On Elisa's person, she even had 2 pictures of her and Judith from the times she visited her in prison. Elisa's father, Frank, was 55 years old and in hospice care, suffering the final stages of AIDS. Moments after he received the phone call about his daughter's death, his mail was delivered. One envelope contained 2 letters, a letter from Elisa and one from Judith. Frank said, "They were sort of laughing at me. They said, 'Ha ha ha, by the time you get this, we will both be in heaven together now.'" Frank said Elisa and Judith had been intertwined in a love affair which consisted of phone calls and death row visits. Judith had been a friend of Frank's first, which is how she and Elisa met. Frank introduced them. Judith called Frank one day and asked him if it was okay that she and Elisa were in love. He felt it would be a safe relationship since Judith was locked up. However, after Frank read a book about Judith, Alvin, and the murders they committed, he did not want his daughter to have anything to do with Judith. The more he tried to talk to his daughter, the more Elisa would pull away and gravitate even more towards Judith. Frank blames Judith for his daughter's death and wishes he had never introduced them to each other. He said, "I wish I had never done that. Judy is a very manipulative and controlling person, even to me. Elisa was a malleable person, easily led, and needing someone to tell her what to do. I feel Judy talked her into killing herself." Judith's lawyer had something to say about that, stating Frank mistreated Elisa and he only wanted someone to pin the blame on for her suicide. The lawyer even went as far as to say, if anything, it was Elisa who tried to talk Judy into suicide. On January 15, 1999, it was mere days before Judith's execution date. She would have been the first woman executed in Alabama in over 40 years. This was around the time notorious Carla Faye Tucker had a controversy surrounding her about being executed after she had converted to Christianity, saying she was born again and was a model prisoner. Christian fundamentalists were on her side, saying she should not be put to death. Judith rode the coattails of Carla, saying she too had converted to Christianity, and Alabama's governor was a Christian fundamentalist. Governor Fob James granted Judith clemency, and instead of being executed in the electric chair, she was granted life in prison. In 2003, Alabama legislature passed a law stating inmates whose death sentences were changed to life were not eligible for parole. However, Alabama's Attorney General at the time, Bill Pryor, made it clear that while the governor has the power to change a sentence, he has no authority to say whether a prisoner has the right to parole or not. Therefore, Judith is eligible for parole and has had a hearing as recently as 2018. On October 21, 2005, 52-year-old Alvin Neelley died at Oconee Regional Medical Center during a surgery. In 2018, when Judith's parole was denied, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey gave a statement. "Not now and not ever. Her crimes include acts of unspeakable brutality. Her character includes a disturbing tendency to manipulate others towards their own violent ends." Judith wrote a letter that was reported by AL.com that said, "Although I am grateful for the opportunity to demonstrate how much God has changed my heart and life over the past 36 years, I know that now is not the right time. In order to spare the Milliken family the pain and trauma of having to attend the hearing, I have agreed to waive my right to be considered for parole at this time. I will continue to pray daily for God's forgiveness and for peace for the Milliken family." Judith will be eligible for parole again this year. Reportedly, Alvin and Judith's children are doing fairly well. Alvin's 3 children he had before Judith, and their 3 children together, have been harassed over what their parents have done. They are doing their best to be happy and live as normal as possible. Family members have spoken out about Judith and Alvin over the years, and a majority of them do seem to be of the opinion that Alvin was the leader, as much as he tried to pin the leader role on Judith. There were also a group of people who believed Alvin was used by Judith, John Hancock being one of the people who spoke out about the day he and Janice were taken. He said Judith was the leader, at least in their situation, and bossed Alvin around. Alvin did as he was told. John went on to say that there was no doubt in his mind that Judith was the leader all along, seeing as how she tortured and murdered little Lisa Milliken. She did the same to Janice and shot him, leaving him for dead. In the newspapers, Alvin was described as a poor slob in love and not the sharpest knife in the drawer. Lisa Milliken's family gathers around her gravestone every year on Lisa's birthday. Today she would be 53 years old. Lisa's sister Tina said, "This is where my sister will always be, right here. If I want to hug her, I have to come touch her stone, because they felt the need to take her away from us." Even if Judith is ever granted parole in Alabama, she will still not get her freedom. If it ever happened, Judith would be extradited to a prison in Georgia where she was convicted of kidnapping and killing Janice Chapman and would serve a life sentence for it. In closing, Cassie Milliken, who would be Lisa's sister-in-law, stated, "Lisa Milliken was more than your midnight terror read, more than some scary camp story, more than all the cliche names the media gave her, such as the Drano murder or Little River Girl. She deserves more respect than that. She was the same little girl who was mommy to her siblings, or giving them a kick in their butt when they needed it. She had wants and needs like we did at 13. The biggest one, a right we all have, but she was denied, just to grow up. She was more than all the things you've gossiped or read about. So, we will be there at every hearing, fighting Judith Neelley tooth and nail." And that concludes today's episode. Thank you so much for listening. And before I go, I want to give a shout out to all the Patreon members at patreon.com/reverytruecrime. Thank you so much, Jason, Jeff, Amanda, Zane, Gigi, Steve, Stephanie, Angel, TZ, Badcast Company, Darling Jade, Matt, Chelsea, and Lorraine. Until next time, everyone, please stay safe, take care of yourselves and each other.